Ayan. The topic that we're going to discuss today is Chapter 1, Lesson 4, the Self as Cognitive Construct or the Psychological Perspective of Understanding the Self. Diba yung natakal na natin is first, uh, the philosophical perspective of understanding the self, society and culture, the anthropological perspective of the self, and now we're going to discuss naman the psychological perspective of understanding ourselves. Paano nga ba dinedefine ng mga psychologists natin ang understanding the self? So our lesson objectives, at the end of this lesson, you should be able to first identify the different ideas in psychology about the self, create your own definition of the self based on the definitions from psychology, and lastly, to analyze the effects of various factors identified in psychology in the formation of the self. So, our discussions will focus on William James, psychologist, seven psychologists. First, we have William James and his concept of self. David Lester, Multiple versus Unified Self, Donald Winnicott, True versus False Self, Carl Rogers and his Self Theory, Sigmund Freud, The Importance of Unconsciousness, Albert Bandura, Self as Proactive and Agentic, and lastly, Carl Jung and his Self as the Central Archetype. So, unang-una, sabi dito, I am who I am. Diba napag-aralan na natin, ako ay ako. But there's a question. If you are who you are, then who you are, that makes you who you are. Diba? Parang twister. Pero sabi niya, kung ikaw ay ikaw, sino ikaw na bumubuo ng ikaw? Diba? So dito, pag-aaralan natin, dito sa psychological perspective of understanding the self, pag-aaralan natin kung sino nga ba ikaw na bumubuo ng pagkatao mo or ano nga ba yung mga factors na bumubuo ng pagkatao natin. So, unang-una, i-discuss muna natin what is psychology. So, psychology is the science of mind and behavior. Psychology includes the study of conscious and unconscious phenomena as well as feelings and thought. So, sinasabi dito na sa psychology is uh, basically focused on understanding human behavior and the human mind. So, dito pinag-aaralan natin kung paano nga ba mag-behave ang isang tao at way of thinking ng isang tao. Pag-aaralan natin siya lahat sa psychology. So, the scientific study of the human mind and its functions, especially those affecting behavior in a given context, and it will help you understand human behavior and mental processes and allow you to better understand how we think, act, and feel. So, dito sa psychology, hindi lang natin pag-aaralan yung behavior ng tao, kundi pag-aaralan din natin kung paano nga ba ang isang tao ay nag-iisip, paano siya kumikilos, at kung paano siya nakakaramdam. So basically, pag-aaralan natin dito ay the internal factors of human behavior. So, let's proceed na sa ating first psychologist, si William James and the concept of self. So, na-discuss na natin to doon sa lesson 2 natin, dun sa the self, society, and culture. He is the father of American psychology. So, si William James is also a philosopher and psychologist, was one of the first to postulate a theory of the self in the principles of psychology. So, 'di ba? Kung natatandaan nyo yung I self and the me self na napag-aralan natin. So, si William James yung nag-propose nung ano na yon, nung idea na yon. So ano nga ba ang sinasabi ng I self and the me self? So sabi ni William James, our self as having two aspects. So meron daw dalawang aspect na bumubuo sa pagkatao natin. First, we have the I self, which refers to the self that knows who he or she is, the thinking self, acting, and feeling self, and reflects the soul of a person or what is now thought of as the mind and is called pure ego. So, si William James, sinasabi niya na si I self natin is self that knows who you are. Siya yung sarili natin na alam yung buong pagkatao natin. Everything in the mind is the I self. So, lahat ng meron tayo that lies within us is the I self. So, ang concern ng I self is about the existence nung sarili natin. While si me self naman natin is the empirical self or our experiences. So, me self refers to describing the person's personal experiences and further divided into subcategories. We have the material self, the social self, and the spiritual self. So, si me self basically focused on the experiences of ourselves. So, ang concern niya is externally, while si I self, ang focus niya is more on internally. So, yun. The material self consists of what belongs to a person, such as the body, family, clothes, or money. 'Di ba? External factor pa rin siya. So next we have the social self, marks who you are in a specific social situation. We tend to change our actions, thoughts, emotions, words, and mannerisms based on the current social situation or the people with whom we are interacting, di ba? We have the social self. Kung sino yung ka-interact natin socially, nag-iiba yung way ng attitude natin or nag-iiba yung behavior natin depending on the ah, people na kausap natin or depending on the situation that we are in. Next, we have the spiritual self. It is who we are at our core, including our personality, values, and conscience. Our spiritual self typically remains relatively stable throughout our lifetime. So, gets naman yun that our spiritual self is our core, di ba? We as Christian nation, ang pinakang core natin is our spiritual self. Regardless kung ano tayo socially, materially, pero ang pinakang pagkatao pa rin natin is based on our spiritual self. So, sabi nga dito ni William James, a man's self is the sum total of all that he can call his, not only his body and his psychic powers, but his clothes and his house. So dito sinasabi lang ni William James na yung psychic power natin refers to existence of the self or our I self, and yung clothing and our houses na sinasabi niya refers to our me self. So, a man's self daw is the sum total of our I and me self. So, wala tayong matatawag na sarili or wala tayong matatawag na self if wala si I self natin and si me self natin. So, yun. Basta si William James, ang kanyang ah, proposal or ang kanyang study is more on the I self and the me self. So next, let's proceed to David Lester and his multiple versus unified self. So sino nga ba si David Lester? So David Lester is a British-American psychologist, suicidologist, and emeritus professor of psychology at Stockton University. So, ang kay David Lester naman is multiple versus unified self. So, ganun niya naman ina-explain ang understanding the self. So, sinasabi niya na ang tao daw is merong multiple and unified self. So, ano nga ba ibig sabihin ng multiple and unified self? So the construction of multiple selves varies across different roles and relationships. Coping with different selves constitutes a formidable task among adolescents. So dito sinasabi niya na ang tao daw ay maraming identities. So we as human beings, we have a lot of identities. For example, ako, iba ang identity ko kapag nasa bahay ako. I identify myself as ate and anak. So pag nasa labas ako, I identify myself as a friend. And pag nasa office ako, I identify myself as secretary ni President. And pag nagtuturo ako sa inyo, I identify myself as your instructor. So, sinasabi lang ng multiple selves that we have different identities, hindi lang iisa yung identity natin. So maraming yung identity natin depending on our role doon sa isang environment na kinabibilangan natin and depending on our relationships. So sabi nga ni David Lester that coping with different selves constitutes a formidable task among adolescents. So, ang adolescents encounters identity crisis kasi 'di ba, sa dami ng task na binibigay sa mga adolescents or sa mga kabataan, nagkakaroon sila ng identity crisis. Tsaka, ang mga kabataan is madali pang maimpluwensyahan ng ah, environment nila kaya nababago-bago pa yung kanilang identity. So, parang nag-boom pa lang yung identity nila, biglang nagkakaroon sila ng maraming roles kaya naguguluhan sila kung sino nga ba yung kung sino nga ba sa dami ng identity nila yung um, susundin nila or yung gagawin nila. So these challenges contributes heavily to the young person struggling for a unified self. So, ang end goal naman talaga natin, regardless kung gaano tayo kadami or gaano karami yung identity natin, kahit pa 100 yung identity mo, the end goal of the study of David Lester is for us to have our unified self. So, when we say unified self, means of referring to the composite persona or to the self that contains all of the other personas that exist within a person's interactional style. So, ibig sabihin lang ng unified self is yung ikaw mismo, yung totoong pagkatao mo, di ba? Yung multiple selves natin is pinapakita lang natin doon sa, or ginagawa lang natin siya doon sa mga social situation or events na kailangan nating mag-act na gano'n. But the unified self is ito yung totoong pagkatao natin.